going to talk about it a little bit first. We covered some of the elements of the national standards and what the national standards require. What is also going to come along to a lot of developers are a lot of other legislation which is currently floating around in the ether and which may or may not get implemented as intended. What a lot of this will do will create a lot of open green space around the UK and on development sites. EU Water Framework Directive at the top, water, sustainability, the bottom two are about climate change, carbon reduction, energy reduction. This is about green space, green infrastructure, maintaining, enhancing, improving. I was interested to see what Martin said about corporate social responsibility from the supermarkets. They're obviously going to do some of these things already. Interesting enough, if this comes in, we have 2 hectares of green open space within 300 metres of every property. Lots of room to put your SuD system in within 5 minutes walk of the property. Natural choice, protecting and enhancing the green economy. Does the National Planning Policy Framework bring it all together? It's looking at radical reduction in greenhouse gas. That isn't going to happen without some of these other features. So then going into what the National Standard says, Bridget's kind of gone through that, so I won't really reiterate it. Essentially, volume and flow control requirements are listed. Very similar to a lot of the previous documentation, PPS 25, Rev-E of the runoff document. Again, 2 ways of doing it, peak flow and volume, or just restricting the flow down to certain volumes. The 2 litres a second is like the long-term storage, avoids the issue of the excess volume going off. One thing it does bring in is the fact that, as PPS 25 had, you can't flood a neighbouring site in a 100-year event. And it also looks at exceedance flows for events that exceed those characteristics above. All of this was in PPS 25, the SuDS manual, lots of other documentation. SuDS for adoption now brings in exceedance flows or system failure flows across the system. So you're looking at also foul systems as well. One thing that does pop up that hasn't come along before, which is a bit of an issue, is the fact that you have to look at inflow from adjacent sites. Unknown characteristics, unknown amount of water, but you have to protect the downstream sites in the 100-year event. So somehow you have to buffer this on your development site. Whether your 5mm interception flow, which disappears into the ground or is used up, could be used as the buffer, could be balanced if you like. You could accept 5mm coming onto the site. Discussion for the SAB, discussion for the Planning Authority. This was a site that I looked at in Northampton. Northampton was another one of those development areas. John Prescott decided he was going to build 10,000 houses on the western expansion of Northampton. This site, or these 2 sites, were both built in the 2000 period. Design data, we were told, was held by the planners. EA had no design data. They're in the River Nene catchment. Have they got a 1 in 200 year level of protection? Have they got a 1 in 30 year level of protection? Have they got a 100 year level of protection? If you were going back and doing this under the national standards, you'd have to allow for that. I don't know the answer, but I think there could be some interesting discussions. What the national standards say in detail, essentially as Martin and Bridget have covered, is the fact that almost everywhere you're going to be looking at 2 levels of treatment. Because roof drainage, single property, as soon as you go into residential, becomes medium, becomes 2 levels of treatment, whether you're draining to any form of aquifer or not. So what you're looking at on just about any site, to groundwater, 2 levels of treatment. Similarly to surface water, normal surface water, it's sensitive, it goes up a level. So you're generally looking at getting 2 levels of treatment in for every part of the flow. And as Bridget mentioned, it gets quite difficult down the bottom end of the site, and I've got a couple of examples which will show how you can fit it in for most of the site, but not everywhere. Building an interesting entity in the national standard is they've tried to define what a property is, and they've tried to define curtilage, and it sort of matches with SuDS for adoption in that a single property is a single property, building regs apply there, national standards don't, SuDS for adoption doesn't. Once you get beyond the single property, everything then kicks in. Treatment processes, Martin mentioned a few of them, 8 treatment processes there. Ponds are listed as having 8, all 8, 4 for a swale. National standards call for between 1 and 3 levels of treatment, or stages of treatment. Doesn't say different devices, neither does the BS. I would have thought some of the SABs, or some of the enhancements to the national standards would call for different types, or different entities of treatment. Cambridge County Council, also the City Council, in one of their diagrams, have paving swale pond. Essex, I think it is, have the paving vegetated channel infiltration basin. Does all the flow need to go through every device? Cambridge City Council have shown an interesting diagram where there is an extension to the site. If developers could buy all these sites at 1 in 200 crossfall with a little extension off the end, we could very easily get 2 levels of treatment in, but it doesn't always look like that. Something we looked at a while ago, talking to developers, talking to Red Row Homes up in the Midlands, was what did the 5mm rule mean? So we could talk to them and try and explain things to them. On a site where 1 hectare is made impermeable, which is approximately 1.7 hectares total, at 60% impermeable, you're looking at 50 cubic metres. 1 hectare impermeable, you're looking 40 plus houses, so you're looking at 1 metre cubed per property. If you capture it, rainwater harvest, reuse it. But you've then got to put that rainwater harvesting system in. Do you pump it back into the site after a time delay? You assume your ground is recovered. Do you, as we put there, rainwater harvesting and reuse, which ties in with the water sensitive urban design, ideas and sustainable water management. Borehole disposal would only really apply if you've got some form of different geology further down. Some of those problems go away when we get on to the next slide, and we have this deemed to comply rule, which was in DEFRA's huddle, an idea DEFRA we're looking at, and has made it through into the BS. What's also interesting to look at is, this is in these numbers from microdrainage, if you look at the figures there, you've got approximately 600 to 800 cubic metres of storage for a no infiltration scenario. For low infiltration, miraculously, you have 50 cubic metres of difference. If you go down the permeable paving route and you spread it all out and get as much infiltration as possible, even a low infiltration site would, in theory, get rid of the 50 cubic metres. But you need that contact area, you need the contact time. It's the no infiltration sites where the developer buys one of those that we start having a problem with this. The 5mm rule, we've done lots of case studies with microdrainage and lots of people who are going to become SABs around the country, and it's the 5mm rule that almost always fails. You can meet everything else, but you find it very hard to meet the interception rule. Until potentially we get this option. DEFRA used 3.5 times the area, paved area draining into a green area. 3.5 times paved into the green area. Deemed to comply, so it takes into account antecedent wetness period, soil moisture, capacity and everything else. The British standard 8582 looks at 4 times the area. I worked out some numbers on that site. You need 20% public open space to make that work. That's kind of pushing the limit. 15% is a normal public open space. 20% may be a bit more difficult. So maybe we have to look at green roofs, rainwater harvesting, which takes it away from trying to match it into the green area. The green area at ground eats up space potentially. The green roof, the rainwater harvesting doesn't. So mix and match. And your attenuation storage, which is about, going back to these numbers, is about 5% of your site area, which can be within your public open space, could also be still a green area. Probably not a wet pond, but it could still be used for the interception storage. So it could be double counted. Could be multi-beneficial, to quote something. Blue-green corridors, looking at economic, affordable design. Don't fight the land, work with it. You've also got to look at exceedance flows. No matter what you do in your 1 in 100-year event, once it gets beyond that, the water is going to go where it's always gone in the past, where it wants to go. You can look at various ways of bringing it in. Google Earth can actually be copied straight into AutoCAD, so if you haven't actually got anything when you're initially looking at a site, you can take data straight off that into AutoCAD. The Essex County Council Guide and the 8582 both look at exceedance flows and the route it will go. This is kindly taken from the Essex County Council Guide. It looks at a sensible approach to planning out your site. It was something AECOM did up in Glasgow, massive 240 hectare site I believe. They looked at green infrastructure and the blue infrastructure. If you look at it sensibly, if you look at your pathways, if you look at where your storage is going to be, and then you look at further developing your site and tying it all together, you end up with a sensible site the drainage engineer can then make work, or the landscaper can make work, and you're not fighting the natural contours of the ground, the natural way the water wants to flow. Upton Phase 1, going back to Northampton. Very large swale, probably the most photographed swale in the UK I would have thought, usually from the other end for whatever reason. But interestingly enough, the buildings on the left are flats, maisonettes. This site has actually got a density of 70 per hectare. It's an incredibly dense site, despite the fact that there's this monstrosity or this massive sort of moat through the middle of it. One of the reasons why other bits work is if you look through, there's an archway through the buildings here, and what they've done is not all of the design is very large open swales. This is sets with a channel down the middle and the storage and attenuation infiltration around the corner outside the garages. If you did now, you'd perhaps look at the tree pits being more multifunctional, perhaps trying to offer some treatment. You may want to go permeable paving, but again you're right up against the building. Unless you design the foundations, do you necessarily want infiltration right next to the building? Usual answer is there's not enough space to make it fit. I need to give a little bit of a reference to Arup there. This was something that David Schofield did while he was still with Arup. The simple answer is use everything, do what you can. Bob mentioned decks, I think, or he's referring to Scotland. Outside the Tesco, right outside the petrol station, there's a roundabout like that with infiltration, well, a little basin inside it. They basically used all the space they could. Picking on the Essex guide again, just to look at this. What this has got is 2 water quality levels. There are green roofs in the outbuildings, there is a vegetated channel here, and there is infiltration basins, and again repeated through. What you get at the bottom of the site though is these 2 buildings here. Unless you have something else off the site, you need either some other level of treatment or some proprietary device. If that's an infill site and that's the end of your system, if you're going to get 2 levels of treatment at the bottom and you're going to build right up to the end, you either need a relaxation. Could you count that as, is that a single house and that a single house, so it doesn't count as residential, so it only needs 1 level of treatment? It's these sort of negotiations you could have with the SAB. Cambridge City, again, looking at this, there are various swales and pond, swale, pond, swale, pond. It's an interesting drawing, and it's a sort of 2D drawing, and I think something we need to get planners involved in. Where the system crosses the road is an issue we often get. Happened in Northampton. They looked at twin pipes, they looked at trying to keep them shallow, they looked at trying to keep them small, they had redundancy by having 2 pipes. What happens at that pond? What happens at the bottom pond? And this is the site where I say it's lovely if you can get the extension on the site like that, but if you've got a more regularly shaped site, you're not going to get those 2 levels of treatment coming off the end. And what does happen at the road crossing, unless you outfall into a sewer or something else. This is an extreme example. It's up there for a reason, trying to provoke some comment. But if you're going under a road, currently most pipes above 350 mil need to be screened. It can be an issue, they can block, they can cause flooding. If you stick something in and it's not the best engineered one in the world, you then need the protection to stop somebody falling in. You have no real means of cleaning that one. You can't stand on the top safely, there's no safety chain, there's lots of other reasons. Question I've been asking of some of the subs is, do you need to screen? Do you want to screen? Is there some other way you could do it to stop either people or debris getting into that pipe? Little small infill sites, not always easy to do things. Here we're looking at permeable paving, rainwater harvesting and a pond off the picture. So you can do it on small little infill sites. Permeable paving does count as 1, potentially 2 levels of treatment, or you could look at some form of buried, more engineered proprietary product. And again here we're looking at treatment roofs if you keep it separate, which is an aspiration of the national standard, 1 level, parking 2 levels. Bridgewater, who I've been a member of since 2005, promote some engineered products. This is a more overtly engineered solution, I'll put that up there. A lot of the green elements are engineered, the swales, the ditches, the wetlands, everything else is engineered. Here we're looking at sedimentation device, storage, flow control and a finer filter. These things can be fitted into smaller spaces where needed. And I had a little bit on safety, but I chopped most of it out. This is again Upton, this is near the very big swale. That's a children's play area on the raised decking, right next to a swale. Cambridge City Council, I like the way they've done it. They've said SuDS is not a risk to health and safety as long as it's put in the middle of the public open space, not hidden away. Use sensible CDM and look at what you're doing. So yes, you can meet national standards. Layout is critical. Treatment is getting more important. Flooding was understood, maybe has to go up a little bit. Other legislation is going to create green space. But we need planners, we need buy-in from planners and buy-in from developers, especially if we're going to use green roofs and flat properties. Planners, for some reason, don't like it when you go sort of Art Deco and make houses flat. And that's the last slide. Thank you very much.